My name is Matthew Orr. I'm the founder, owner, and lead architect for VoIPTools. We've been doing this now for about 14, maybe 15 years now that we've been building add-on products for 3CX. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Emergency Notifier. This is a tool that we've had for quite a while, but it has been going through a number of changes recently with new enhancements. And so I thought it'd be good if we spent a few minutes kind of going over why this product exists and how it can help you and your organization. So let me log in, and if you notice, I'm putting in my extension and my voicemail pin. And then what Emergency Notifier does is it goes out and communicates with the 3CX server and verifies my credentials, looks to see if I'm a manager or a PBX admin or a regular user, and then based on those rights that I have in 3CX, it will affect what menu options are available to me when I log in. So this is one of the main screens, but there are quite a number of other screens that we'll be talking about today. Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you face with emergency notifications in the 3CX product native. So some of those things don't have much granularity in 3CX to define where somebody exists. And in our tool, you'll see here, this is a list of extensions that we've pulled out of 3CX. If I click on this button here, and then I click import extensions, it'll go to the 3CX server and grab all those extensions and add them to this list here. And if you've deleted an extension, it'll remove them from the list here. 3CX doesn't really provide a place for you to put in things like what building, what address, what floor, what pillar, what cubicle, so that you can get down to very specifics of where somebody exists. So that's the purpose of this screen, is to document the default location for all of these extensions. And this data will be used when we send notifications. So the way that our tools work in general, so let's just have a quick discussion about how our applications function. 3CX has a call control API that allows you to query information about 3CX. So that's how I got this list of extensions from 3CX, is I'm using the call control API to get a list of extensions. But the call control API also has an event environment that you can subscribe to, and it will tell you what's happening on the 3CX server. So for example, we can subscribe to new call events, and we look at that call event and we check, is this a call to an emergency number? And if it is, then we know it's time for us to take action and start sending notifications and log who's doing what, when, where. So we communicate with the 3CX call control API via a piece of software that we call the VoIPTools Relay. And that VoIPTools Relay is installed directly on the 3CX server, and it connects to the call control API and then exposes those APIs and events to the outside world. And this relay is necessary because the call control API that 3CX provides doesn't allow communication outside of the 3CX server. The relay makes a connection to the call control API, and then over HTTPS, it makes that data available to our applications. Without the relay, the only way that you could communicate with 3CX is if you installed our tools directly on the 3CX server. And there's all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't want to do that. One is that our tools have a need for a database to store all of this address information, for example. And 3CX doesn't permit us to make any changes or add new tables to the internal 3CX database, but they won't allow us to install a separate database on the 3CX server. So by necessity, the database has to be on a separate server. At the same time, these tools that we have require processing power, CPU, memory, disk. And if we were to install these applications directly on the 3CX server, it would require additional capabilities of the server that you're running it on, but it could also have a negative interaction between our software and the 3CX software. So having them completely separate was at the request of 3CX. Actually, in the early days, we did install our tools directly on the 3CX server, but 3CX later came back and said, no, we'd prefer that you install the database and the web server and all of your tools on a separate server. And that necessitated that we create the relay so that software running on a separate server could communicate with the 3CX server. All right, that's a long dissertation on our architecture and not what you're here to talk about. You want to know about emergency notifier. So perhaps the first step in setting up emergency notifier is to get a list of extensions and then update their address location. This address information will be presented to people through notifications via a telephone call, an email, an SMS text message, and a desktop pop-up. So one of the things that I've learned is that doing a little pop-up in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and sending me an email is grossly insufficient for getting my attention. Because I've got a zillion people that are trying to communicate with me all day, my computers are going bing and bong and all kinds of messages going all the time. Send me an email, that's going to get lost in 400 other emails that came in that day. So that's worthless. Doing a little pop-up that displays on the screen and then goes away is worthless because Teams and everything else is doing those little pop-ups. So they get lost. So having a telephone call, having an SMS text message, having an email, having a desktop pop-up, the more channels of notification, the more likely that I'm going to be aware that somebody just dialed 911. So this screen is where you put in the details of where that person is located. And that's used in all of the notifications that I receive. All right, so who should get notified? That's probably the next question. If I go to contacts, here's where you add people. You can add another person here by pressing the plus, and we'll put me in here for fun. Email address. I don't mind if you have my email address. This next field is important to understand. We want to send a text message to one of our internal staff that says that Matthew at extension such and such in building floor pillar cubicle has dialed 911. We could integrate with every SIP trunk provider in the world, and that would be a lot of work, and there would be some cost associated with building and maintaining that integration. Or alternatively, we can leverage the free email to SMS gateway that here in the United States anyway, every carrier provides an email to SMS gateway. So basically all you do is you send an email to the person's cell phone. telephone number. So 920-988-1234. No, that isn't my real telephone number. And then the @ symbol, because this is an email. And then each carrier has their own gateway domain name. So AT&T is AT&T.net, I think, and VText is Verizon. So that's how I create a resource that I can then send notifications to. I'm going to call them on this cell phone number, and I'm going to use text to speech to play the emergency notification. I'm going to send them an email with all of the detail. I'm going to send them a text message by sending an email to this gateway, and the body of that email is going to get converted to a text and then texted to this telephone number. And then this next section is about which notifications I care about. Let's take a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that I'm a school district and I have a centralized phone system that's at the district office. And then I have a couple of high schools, a couple of junior highs, a couple of grade schools. And these are all separate facilities in various parts of the town. So if somebody at the grade school dials 911, but I'm an emergency responder that's at the high school, I don't want to be notified that somebody at the grade school dialed 911. I only care about if somebody dialed 911 at the high school. Does that make sense? So you can say, if I am the district manager and I want to be notified if anybody dialed 911 at any one of the schools, then I leave it at all notifications. But if I'm interested in only the high school, then I would create a group within 3CX called High School 1 or something like that. And then I would select that location. It's a group that you create within 3CX. And then if any extension that belongs to that group in 3CX dials 911, then I'm going to get notified. But if it's an extension that's not in that group, then I'm not going to get notified. Okay? So that's how this all works. So I'll press save there. So this is how you create all of your internal people that need to be notified. All right, what about emergency numbers? How are we keeping track of emergency numbers? Now, in the United States, we have one telephone number, that's 911, and everybody dials 911. It doesn't matter if it's a fire or a medical emergency or active shooter or poison control, it doesn't matter. You just dial 911. But in other parts of the world, that's not the case. They will have a separate number for ambulance, a separate number for poison control, a separate number for police, a separate number for the fire department. So we needed to build into this multiple emergency numbers. But what's important is that we also can create test emergency numbers. So these are extensions that you can flag as an emergency number. And what this allows you to do is to call that emergency number that's flagged as a test emergency number, and that emergency number doesn't go anywhere. You call that number, emergency notifier recognizes it as an emergency telephone call, and it starts sending out notifications that a test is in place. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So remember, I told you that we send notifications by phone, by email, by SMS text message, and by desktop pop-up. And those mediums lend themselves to specific limitations. So for example, you could write a very lengthy email with bold and italic and red and and pictures and all that kind of stuff. And that's where you would put it for the email here. But for SMS text messages, there's a limited number of characters that you can send in a text message. So it needs to be a more concise message than what's possible through an email. So you create a template here for email and for SMS text message, and you can insert into these templates uh, um, variables for the person's name, the date and time, their building location, cubicle, all of those kinds of things. Those are here, right? So you basically do emergency. Oh, there's probably one here already. Remember, we have multiple emergency numbers, and you can have different messages that get sent out to your internal emergency responders based on which telephone number was dialed. So you select one of those emergency numbers. This is the test one, for example, and you'll notice that when somebody dials the test emergency number, I think 700 is, well, actually, that's okay because we're 4-digit extension, so that would actually work, I guess. You'll notice that it has the word test in here, and it says this is only a test. So if I dial extension 700, I don't want all of the people that were associated with this emergency number location. I don't want them to all think that somebody actually dialed an emergency number. I want them to recognize, hey, this is just a test. So that's why it's important that you have the ability to have different templates based on what emergency number the person dialed. And you'll see in here that there's a bracket around the word extension. That's because it's a variable. So if I insert this into the text, when we send that notification, it's going to be replaced by the actual data. So it will have the extension number, the person's first and last name, their cell phone number, what floor they're on, their address, all of that stuff. So that's how we send out notifications that are very, very specific to who dialed the number and where they were. So again, this is all stuff that 3CX can't do natively. This is all features that we've added to the whole process. Now, I've been talking a lot. Any questions so far?
We have a question here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
It says, what if the phone system is owned by the country and they want their country dispatch receptionist to receive the SMS notification at their 911 emergency number as a text for calls made from within the buildings? It is in traditional SMS number, but it is 911.
What if I don't have a email to SMS gateway? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So for those countries that don't have an email to SMS gateway, in that scenario, we'd probably want to find a third party that could provide that service. Of course, there's going to be a cost associated with that, but there are third-party companies that can provide that service. And if that's not acceptable, then we can always write an integration specifically for your SIP trunk carrier that's providing the SMS stuff. Sending an outbound SMS in these APIs generally is really quite simple. The hardest part is the authorization, the authentication step, but actually sending it is typically pretty straightforward. For example, Twilio has a SMS API, and it's pathetically simple. You just provide a username and a license key, and then it's no more difficult than saying send to this number this information. So Building one for your specific carrier in your country would not be significantly difficult. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay, another question, go ahead.
So we have a question that how does emergency notifier process a 911 misdial?
If somebody dials 911 and they didn't mean to dial 911, I have no way of knowing that that wasn't their intent. Let me give you an example of a scenario that happened to me. This is going back probably 20 years ago, I guess. I was working at a customer's construction company in the middle of the night because we were doing server upgrades. And I needed to call a fax number and send a fax to somebody with a question. I don't remember what the reason was, but they had to dial 9 to get an outside line. And then the fax number started with 91. It started with 11 was the telephone number. So I was dialing 9 and then 11 da 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 da. And the phone system thought I was dialing 911 when it was really I was just dialing 9 to get an outside number. And so the sheriff department showed up with their guns drawn, and I'm looking at them through the glass front door with my hands up, going, "Dude, why are you here? What's going on?" And they said, "Well, you dialed 911." And oh, well, so that I don't have any ways to know a person's intent if they dial 911. Remember, this is handled by 3CX. All we're doing is listening to the events. So if you dial 911, 3CX is going to send that call out to the emergency responders, and we're just listening in on that whole process of what 3CX is doing. So hopefully that answers the question. If you can clarify it further,
Yeah,
I'm more than happy to
it's
revisit
exactly
it.
the same scenario, Matthew.
Okay. Yeah. So again, we're not stopping those calls. We're not intercepting those calls. We're not doing anything with those calls, just listening in on what telephone numbers people are calling.
So Kevin have a question again that can emergency notifier provide a 911 was not dialed cleanly notification?
911 was not dialed clearly. Either you dial 911 or you don't dial 911. So I think we've got a question here that I'm not understanding. How do you not dial 911 clearly? How
That would be a Matthew's fax issue. He dialed 911 sort of.
look, if you dial 911 and you press enter, it's 911. Now, where I got into trouble is that it was late at night, and I remember this quite vividly because the guys came to the door with their guns drawn. Um, where I was getting into troubles, I was dialing 9 to get the outside number, and then I started dialing the telephone number, but because I was so tired, I couldn't remember the whole number. So I was pausing to look back at my notes at what number I was supposed to dial. And it was going, oh, well, he's stopped dialing digits. So he must be meaning to dial 911. So I'm going to send the call out. Um, so that's the only scenario that I can think of in 3CX where if you paused too long after dialing 911, even though you had more digits to dial, if you paused too long, the interdigit timeout would take place and it would say, oh, he dialed 911, do your thing, right? So I don't really understand the scenario under which there's a concern other than what we've explained. We're not going to we're just listening to the telephone calls that go out from 3CX. So if somebody dials 911, 3CX is going to place that call. We're going to recognize that 3CX placed that call, and then we're going to start taking our actions, sending notifications and that kind of stuff. Okay, so hopefully, is there any more questions before we move on?
What if the phone system is owned by the county and they want their county dispatch receptionist to receive the SMS notification at their 911 emergency number as a text call for calls made from within their buildings?
Yeah, that's
Is
no
it
problem.
traditional SMS number?
Yeah, you just, well, let's back up. If we go to contacts, you can put anybody in here that you want. You don't see any extension numbers here, do you? So if they're on a completely different phone system, totally unrelated to 3CX, they can still get notifications. Phone, email, SMS, text message, desktop pop-up. All of those things can still happen because we're specifying notify this person at this number, this email, and this SMS text message location. You can add anybody on here that you want. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, so let's take a look at settings. I don't even remember what's in here, so let's take a look. This is just the ability to start and stop the service. So you can manage the Windows service right from here rather than having to go to the Windows applet. Remember, we're sending emails, so we need to have SMTP credentials to send emails through your mail server. We have the choice of using either the text-to-speech engine that's built into Windows, which is actually okay. It's not horrible. But you can also use Amazon Polly as the text-to-speech engine. And so if you've ever used an Alexa, an Amazon Dot, and you've heard that voice that you're interacting with those tools, it's really, really good in terms of it would be difficult for you to know, am I talking to a human being or is this a computer? It's not obvious anymore. So you can use a very good engine for doing text to speech, and you can do it in any language you want. There is a default language, of course, so you choose your country and then the voice that you want to use for those notifications. And then you put in your Amazon ID and key. This does mean that you have to create an Amazon account, and but you're never going to go past the free tier. So they will require you to put in a credit card, but they'll never charge your credit card because you're going to do so few transactions that you'll never exceed the free tier unless you're using emergency notifier for something other than what I'm anticipating you would use it for. Okay. Let's look at this tab for a minute. One of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure, because of the criticality of this piece of software, we want to make sure that it's working. And the only real way to test whether it's working is for you to dial an emergency number and see if everybody's getting the notifications that they're supposed to, or you automate the process. And we all have very busy jobs that require us to do things that we may not actually remember to do all the time. So what this does is it sets up, to use the example that I've been using before, there's probably a, well, anyway, you select a emergency number that is going to dial, and then you create a scheduled task in Windows that says, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon, I want to run a test call. And if I don't get an email, a text message, a telephone call, and a desktop pop-up, then I know something's broken. And you could do this test as many times as you wanted. And if you didn't want this to go out to the broader world, you just create a group within 3CX called emergency test, and you put yourself in that list, and then you set that as the test emergency number. And then you could have it test every hour if you wanted to, and the only person that would be notified is you or anybody else that you put into that emergency test group. Remember, if you go into contacts and you specify what group you want to belong to, you would just put emergency test in here and it would call your number. So you might consider, for example, just getting a test phone and hooking it up to your network, and its only purpose is for testing the emergency notifications, and you'd put that extension in the group, and it's going to call that telephone number and send an email and text message to you. So there's ways that you could test this as often as you wanted in an automated fashion, just to make sure that somebody didn't, for example, upgrade 3CX to the latest version and forget to update emergency notifier to be compatible with that new version of 3CX. This is all about making sure that your emergency notification system works. All right, so we've gone through settings now. Let's talk about locations. I think that's the next step. Here's the challenge. I normally work in building A, and I'm being audited or something like that, and that requires that I go and sit in a conference room with a bunch of auditors. So I pick up my laptop and I move it to the other building and I sit down and I start working there and I dial 911. I'm not at the location that I am supposed to be at, am I? So we want to make sure that emergency notifier recognizes that you've changed locations. So if you're using 3CX Phone for Windows, it's going to register as soon as you move into the new location. And part of that registration process is providing my IP address of my phone. Same thing's true if I pick up a phone and move it to a new location. Same thing. When you boot it up, it's going to register with 3CX, and part of that is going to include the IP address. So in here, what you can do is you can add subnet ranges. And I didn't write this. So this is the location. So this would normally say high school 1 or something like that. I went to Bella Vista High School in California. So this would say Bella Vista High School, this group. And at this location, this is the IP subnet range that we're going to have in here. So it'd be something like 10.10.220.1 through 10.10.220, all right, fat fingers, 220.155, like that. All right. And then when my phone registers, it's going to go into this list and it's going to say, is that IP address in this subnet range? And if it is, then I know that they are at this location. And then I'm going to change my location in 3CX. And I need to get a link to our 3CX server here so that I can show you in the console what I'm talking about. So give me a second, see if I can't log into our 3CX server. Okay, so if I go to settings and then I go to general, where is general? There's general. And I go down to emergency numbers and I choose add. I can say if I dial 911, that's just a title up here. This is the actual number, right? 911. And I belong to a group that is at this location, then I'm going to outpulse this DID. And so, let's see, let's do the correct number. 801-642-4655. Okay. So what this means is that we can control what is sent to the PSAP based on the DID that's being outpulsed in your SIP invite to your SIP trunk carrier. So what this necessitates is that you go into your SIP trunk provider and they will have a web interface that allows you to set up E911. And you will say that if somebody calls from this DID, that gets mapped to the following location, and you put in all the location, building, pillar, cubicle, all that information into the location information at your SIP carrier. So not only are we sending notifications to your internal people where this person resides, but we're also sending information out to the PSAP of where this person locates. And that's based on the IP address of the device that dialed 911. Cool, right? So now you can have staff moving all over the place, and we'll keep updating their location based on the IP address. Now, this necessitates, of course, that if you have people in building A and people in building B, the subnet that your DHCP server is presenting to the people in building A needs to be a different subnet than the IP addresses that your DHCP server is providing to building B, or building B floor 1, that kind of thing, right? So you can get as granular on this as you want. It's a function of how many DIDs do you have. So you need a minimum of one DID for every location you have in order for the correct information to be presented to the PSAP. Does that make sense? So, in the interest of being honest, there are some limitations to this feature, this location feature. And we're in the process of addressing some of the limitations. One of the challenges is that what happens if you have two phones and they're both associated with the same extension, and one phone is in building A and the other phone is in building B? Now we got a problem, because that extension is associated with a specific location. And if you've got two phones that are in different locations, how do we know which location dialed 911? So we need to do some work in that scenario. Just being honest, that's an area that we need to do some more work. There's another scenario where we have some challenges. See, I'm a really lousy salesman because I tell the truth. And I'm not afraid to tell you where we need to do some work, because I'm an honest fellow and I don't want you to be surprised. The other scenario with this location service that is problematic is if they are not using a physical phone and they are not using 3CX phone for Windows. Why? Because when you use the web client or the Electron client, which is, they call it PWA for whatever reason. I don't even know what PWA stands for. If you're using one of those two clients, they're basically web pages, and those web pages reside on the 3CX server. So regardless of where you log into your web client, the IP address that is registered with 3CX is the IP address of the 3CX server. It's not unique to whoever's logging into those. So we're working with a very, very large multinational corporation right now to extend this capability to allow them. They use handheld scanners that they're walking around inside the warehouse, and they can dial 911 from that emergency scanner. Um, we're working with them to build a location service based on the Wi-Fi access points MAC address, so that when you dial 911, we've already seen that you've gone into a new zone of the Wi-Fi access point, and so we update your location based on your Wi-Fi access point. So that's the first thing we're doing. The second thing that we're working on is if your customer or your end user is using one of the web-based clients, the Electron or the web client, what we're going to do is we're going to add to our desktop notification client the ability to report what your IP address is of the physical device that has the browser open. And then that'll function the same way as the existing services, just rather than the phone registering with 3CX, it's going to be our application registering with Emergency Notifier to let you know where that that laptop is that's using the web client. So those are two places where there's a deficiency in the 3CX native product, and we're working to fill those gaps. So the idea here with this next release that we're working on now is that if I pick up my laptop and I walk from one building to another, that little application that automatically starts when you boot up your laptop and runs in the lower right-hand corner of the notification tray, it's going to go, hey, wait a minute, my IP address has changed. I better let Emergency Notifier know that my IP address has changed, so that Emergency Notifier can change the location group that you belong to, so that if you were to dial 911, it's going to say, okay, you're now at this location. So those are a couple of deficiencies that we haven't addressed just yet. There's more that we need to talk about. What are speed dials? Let's take a scenario. I'm a very petite little elderly lady, and my job is to be a receptionist in the front office of my building. And an inebriated, mentally ill person walks into the front door carrying a machete and is waving this machete around saying, I need somebody to pay my taxes. You know, just a crazy person. This little receptionist lady isn't physically big enough to deal with a big crazy person wielding a machete. So she's going to want to let the big burly guys that are the emergency responders for my company know that there's a problem, but she needs to do it surreptitiously. So all she does is she reaches over to a BLF on her phone and she pushes the panic button. And that panic button goes into the list of contacts and it says who should be notified when somebody presses a panic button and where is this person that dialed that pressed the panic button. And it's going to send them an email, an SMS, text message, a phone call, and a desktop alert that says this panic has taken place. So that's one scenario with these speed dials, is it panic buttons that you can create. Maybe somebody spills something in the warehouse that's flammable or caustic or poisonous or whatever. They might be able to run over to a phone in the warehouse and press that panic button, and then people know this came from a panic button at this location. Get the people with the EPP clothes on and run over there, right? Another scenario is, let's take another hypothetical, is I have an active shooter that is in the school and I see what's going on, and so I run over and I press a panic button for active shooter. And what that does is it sends over the overhead paging system emergency active shooter on campus, please lock your door and go to a secure location or exit the building, or whatever you want the message to say. And it'll play that message over and over and over again. Maybe a less triggering example would be, I look out the window and I see a tornado's coming. I don't want to sit there and dial the extension for my overhead paging system and say, hey guys, I can see that there's a tornado. It's about 10 feet from our front door. We're all going to die unless you get to the tornado shelter immediately. Well, by that time, it's too late. The tornadoes come through the window and I'm flying through the air, right? So it'd be a whole lot nicer if I could just reach over and hit the tornado warning button on my phone and run for the tornado shelter while we let 3CX play the message over the overhead paging system. So one of the features of this speed dial is you press the button to initiate the alarm, and to disable the alarm, you just push the button a second time. So fire alarms, tornado warnings, active shooters, you don't have to be there to activate it or to deactivate it. You just call the extension. Now, of course, you're going to need to put some security on it so that some teenagers don't find out what that extension number is and start calling into your phone system and dialing that extension number. You're going to have to do some constraints in 3CX to make sure that not anybody can dial that number, but you get the idea. Press the button once and it will repeat whatever message you want it to repeat over and over and over. Go to the tornado warning, go to the tornado shelter immediately, pause for 5 seconds, go to the tornado shelter immediately, that kind of thing. Then once everybody's inside the tornado shelter, then you use your cell phone app and you dial the extension again and it turns it off so that you don't have to listen to that alarm going off for the next 3 days. So that's what this is all about. Remember, you need an extension number to program on your BLF, right? So you go and look and see what's an available extension number. Let's say that it's 807. 807. That's going to be the extension number that you're going to define. This is just a description, so tornado. And how do you want to send these notifications? Do you want to send emails? Well, sure I do. SMS? Absolutely. Do I want to repeat it, or do I just want to do it once? So if it's a panic button, for example, you might want to do it once. If it's a fire alarm, you may want it to repeat. And then you choose the audio file that you want it to play when you press that button, right? And then when you press this publish button, this is really cool. What this does when you press the publish button is that it goes and automatically creates a new call flow designer application, uploads that to the 3CX server, assigns an extension number to that call flow designer application, and you're basically done. Now all you have to do is provision a BLF on your phone for extension 807, and you're done. So it's that easy to create a panic button. Let's see, and this is where you can upload a WAV file that's going to get played. So if you wanted, you could leave yourself a voicemail and then take the resulting WAV file that you created when you saved your voicemail and upload that to the 3CX server, and then it can play that. All right, so we've talked about extensions, contact speed dials, emergency numbers, messages, settings, locations. The last thing that we haven't discussed, and again, it's complaining because I made it changes but didn't save it, but I don't care. Here's a scenario. Somebody in my organization thinks they're having a heart attack, so they reach over and they dial 911, and then they hang up. Because they think, oh no, I'm just being ridiculous. I'm not having a heart attack. I just have indigestion or something. I'm fine. But it's too late because they dialed 911 and the notifications all have been sent. So the emergency responders show up and the ambulance guys, paramedics show up, and they're talking to the guy, and the guy saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry. It was just a big mistake. I've been feeling like I got a little indigestion. I'm fine." And the paramedics say, "Well, yeah, you don't look so good. We think you need to go." Nope, I'm fine. I refuse. I'm not going. And they can't convince the guy that he needs to go and get checked out at the hospital. An hour later, he has a heart attack and dies. The family's grieved, of course. They're upset. Months go by. They've had the funeral. People have kind of calmed down and they start thinking about it and they go, I'll bet you that those people at that business where he was working didn't do the right thing. We're going to sue him. Well, a year has gone by, and all the people that were involved in this whole thing, the emergency responders that showed up, they've left to go to another company or retired or whatever. The paramedics are gone. We don't know who they were. They were just paramedics. We don't know who they were. So there's no notes about what happened, who did what. So one of the things that we do is we record when somebody dials an emergency number, and we keep track of who was notified and how they were notified, and we allow you to add notes to it. Yeah, we all showed up at the guy's location. It took us about 2 minutes to get there. He said that he was fine. We over and over tried to get him to go to the hospital, but he refused. And so we sent the paramedics home. Right? And these are the people that were involved, names, telephone numbers, that kind of thing. So now when they go to sue, you can go back and look at who did what and when, because you've got a place that keeps track of all of that information. Because otherwise, where are you going to write this kind of stuff? You're going to put it in your CRM? I don't know. Maybe you would, but this just gives you a place to look and see who dialed 911, when did they dial it, because we have the date and time that they dialed it, where they were when they dialed it, and notes about what transpired so that you know what went on. So that's it. That's our emergency notifier. It's been a great tool. We've got a lot of people around the world that are using this tool. I like to think that we've helped a lot of people with this tool, and we have a vision for where this tool is going to go in the near future, where it will be even better. But the thing to remember is I need to know who dialed 911, where they were, and multiple channels of notification to tell them. I didn't even show you the desktop pop-up, but it's just a dialog box that pops up on the top of your screen that has text that it got from text-to-speech and from the template that you use for the email. That's what displays up on the screen. And it doesn't just pop up in the right-hand corner. It pops up in the middle of the screen, and you have to click on it to get it to go away. Otherwise, it's going to just stay there on the front of all of your other applications, and you can tell it to use text-to-speech to play an audible message. It can play an alarm. So it can be pretty obnoxious, and there's settings to allow you to change how obnoxious you want that thing to be. But that's in a nutshell. That's our emergency notifier. I thank you for giving me some of your time today, guys. If you have more questions, if you'd like to ask for a new feature, feel free to contact us at sales@voiptools.com or support@voiptools.com, or call our main number 801-642-4655, or get us on live chat. We do have support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week around the world. That's what Mohit's team does. They're our support team, and they're here to help you any time of the day, any day of the week, holidays, weekends, doesn't matter. We've got people here to help you with your tools. All right. Thank you, guys. Bye.